I stood in the back of the chapel because I didn't know where someone like me belonged when the woman who saved my life was being buried. The air smelled like lilies and polished wood, and every breath felt like it scraped my lungs raw. Linda's photo smiled from the front, gentle and familiar, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Grief sat heavy in my chest, not sharp, just crushing, like something permanent had finally settled in. Mark sat in the front row, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor as if it might open and swallow him. He looked smaller than I remembered, older in a way that hadn't been there a week ago. I wanted to go to him, to put my hand on his shoulder the way Linda always did for me, but my feet wouldn't move. I'd spent my whole life afraid that if I stepped forward, someone would decide I didn't belong and send me away again. I learned that fear early. I don't remember my biological parents' faces from that time, but I remember the feeling of being unwanted, like it was burned into my skin. A hospital room too bright, voices hissing in the corner, Carol crying, not out of love but panic. Dennis pacing, cursing under his breath about ruined plans and bad timing. No one held my hand. No one whispered promises. One day they were there, and the next, they were gone. People like to say babies don't remember abandonment, but that's a lie we tell ourselves to sleep better. My body remembered. I grew up flinching at raised voices, apologizing for existing, convinced that love was something temporary you had to earn daily. Every foster home reinforced it, each goodbye another confirmation that I was disposable. By the time Linda and Mark entered my life, I'd already learned how to pack my heart into a box. Linda refused to let me stay boxed up. She spoke softly but never backed down, meeting my silences with patience that felt suspicious at first. Mark taught me how to ride a bike, jogging behind me until I was steady. Even after work, when his legs were tired, they showed up. Over and over. Birthdays, bad dreams, school plays where I forgot my lines. Slowly, against my will, I started to believe them. That belief shattered the day Linda got sick. Hospitals again, but this time I stayed. I held her hand, listened to the machines, felt the roles reverse as she worried about me instead of herself. When she died, something essential went quiet inside me. At the funeral, people told me how lucky I was to have been adopted by such wonderful parents, and I nodded because explaining felt impossible. Luck had nothing to do with it. They chose me. After the service, we gathered in a small office that smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. The lawyer cleared his throat, voice formal and distant, and read Linda and Mark's will. I stared at the carpet, counting the tiny blue flowers, bracing for another goodbye. When he said my name and told me everything had been left to me, my ears rang. I felt dizzy, almost ashamed. Mark squeezed my hand then, finally looking at me. His eyes were red, but steady. "It's what we wanted," he whispered, as if reading my thoughts. Gratitude and fear tangled in my chest, because I knew money changed things. It attracted people. As we left the building, I had no idea that the people who once threw me away were about to come back. Not for me, but for what they thought I owed them. I drove home alone, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, replaying Linda's laugh in my head like a lifeline. The house felt too quiet, every room echoing with absence and love at the same time. I told myself the past was buried, that abandonment stayed where it belonged. But some part of me sensed a disturbance, like a door left unlocked. Grief had cracked me open, and somewhere out there, old ghosts were already turning the handle. I wasn't ready for the reckoning that waited just ahead. The weeks after the funeral blurred together, grief turning time elastic and unreliable. Some mornings I woke up reaching for my phone to call Linda, forgetting for a split second that she was gone. The inheritance paperwork arrived in thick envelopes, heavy and official. My name printed where it had never been before. I felt like an imposter opening them, like someone would burst through the door and demand it all back. At work, co-workers treated me differently once rumors spread, voices hushed, eyes lingering, as if money had altered my outline without asking permission from me entirely forever somehow. I tried to keep my routine intact, clinging to normalcy like a railing on a steep stairwell. Coffee tasted bitter. Sleep came in fragments, and silence pressed against my ears at night. Mark and I spoke often, checking on each other, but both of us avoided saying the worst parts out loud. Then one evening, a knock cut through the quiet, sharp, and deliberate. Through the peephole, I saw two figures that made my stomach drop, faces older but instantly recognizable. Carol smiled. Dennis didn't. My pulse hammered like a warning siren inside me. I froze completely in that moment. I opened the door because some old reflex told me to obey, to not make trouble. Carol rushed forward, arms open, perfume sweet and cloying, calling me her baby like it wasn't absurd. Dennis stayed back, eyes scanning the apartment, assessing value. They talked fast, overlapping apologies with excuses, telling stories where they were victims of circumstance. I stood there nodding, heart pounding, watching them rewrite my life in real time. Every word scraped at me, dredging up memories I'd spent years trying to bury. My throat tightened painfully as I listened, unable to speak at all in that instant. They noticed the changes quickly, eyes lighting up at new furniture, the quiet confidence money brings. Carol touched my arm too much, voice softening as she asked how I was doing financially. Dennis cut to the point, mentioning Linda and Mark, their assets, their generosity. The room felt smaller with every word, air thick with expectation. I tried to redirect, to talk about weather, work, anything safer, but they exchanged a look that told me exactly why they were here. My palms were slick with sweat, and my chest burned with dread. I recognized too well now, finally, again inside. Carol sighed dramatically, wiping at imaginary tears as she spoke about regret and forgiveness. Dennis leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice low and firm, saying family should take care of each other. When the word inheritance finally landed between us, my stomach twisted hard. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't mention my childhood. They talked numbers, responsibility, what I owed them for bringing me into the world. I felt 13 again, small and cornered, fighting the urge to disappear. The room seemed to tilt around me as my heartbeat thundered loudly in my ears nonstop that night. I mumbled something noncommittal, promising to think about it, because confrontation felt impossible. They left satisfied enough, Carol hugging me like we were close, Dennis reminding me to call. The door closed and I slid down against it, legs shaking, breath shallow. Shame and anger wrestled inside me, old instincts screaming to comply. I hated how easily they had found the cracks Linda worked so hard to heal. That night, I barely slept, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, wondering if I was strong enough to finally say no to them without losing myself again like before this time. Morning light brought no relief, only clarity sharpened by exhaustion. I realized they hadn't come back for me, not really, just for what I represented now. That truth hurt worse than the knock itself. Linda's voice echoed in my memory, steady and protective, telling me my worth wasn't negotiable. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around cold coffee, feeling something unfamiliar forming beneath the fear. It wasn't rage yet, or courage, but resolve. For the first time, I considered fighting back, even if it terrified me deeply and changed everything forever, starting right then in my own life. The call started the next morning. Missed calls at first, then voicemails stacked one after another. Carol's voice syrupy and wounded. Dennis's clipped and irritated. They called during work hours, during dinner, once at nearly midnight like urgency justified everything. Each ring made my shoulders tense, a familiar tightness crawling up my spine. I let them go to voicemail, listening later, with my jaw clenched, hearing the same refrains repeated until they felt rehearsed. Family, obligation, sacrifice. Every word landed like a thumb pressing into an old bruise I thought had faded. They didn't wait long before escalating. Dennis showed up at my office one afternoon, standing too close, smiling like he owned the place. My coworkers watched from behind their monitors, curiosity buzzing. He asked loudly how his kid was doing, how proud he was, how good it felt to reconnect. I could smell his aftershave, feel the heat of embarrassment crawl up my neck. When I asked him to leave, he laughed and said I was being dramatic. That night, Carol texted paragraphs about how deeply I'd hurt him, how I should be ashamed. The flashbacks came uninvited, slipping into my thoughts when I least expected them. Being 8 years old, sitting on a foster home couch with a packed backpack, waiting for a car that never came, being told not to get attached, that things changed. Linda had held me while I cried the first time I told her that story, her sweater damp with my tears. Now, Carol twisted that history, claiming they checked on me, that they cared from afar. I felt like my own memories were being gaslit into something unrecognizable and cruel. They began demanding specifics, numbers spoken casually like grocery items. Dennis said I owed them for hospital bills, for giving me life, for opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise. Carol cried about medical issues, rent, how hard things had been without support. Each conversation left me drained, shaky, staring at my reflection afterward like I was looking for someone stronger. I hated how part of me still wanted their approval, how deeply that instinct ran. It made me angry at myself, which somehow hurt worse than their pressure. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday when Dennis called and didn't bother with pleasantries. He told me he'd spoken to a lawyer friend, said I should be careful, that inheritances could get messy. He called me ungrateful, accused Linda and Mark of poisoning me against my real family. My hands trembled so hard I had to sit down on the kitchen floor. Something inside me went very still then, like a door quietly closing. I heard myself say no, clearly, for the first time. Silence followed, then laughter sharp enough to cut. Dennis warned me I'd regret it. Carol texted immediately after, switching tactics, telling me I was breaking her heart. I didn't respond. I sat there listening to the rain hit the windows, heart racing. But beneath the fear was something new, resolve. I realized I was done being pulled apart by people who never bothered to hold me together. Linda hadn't raised me to be afraid forever. She taught me how to stand. That night, I pulled out the adoption paperwork I'd hidden in a box for years. My name printed neatly, signatures dated, and final. Relinquishment. Permanent. I traced the ink with my finger, breathing slowly. For the first time, I didn't feel like a discarded thing reading those pages. I felt grounded. They had given me up. That truth mattered. And as exhaustion finally took me, one thought settled firmly in my chest. If they wanted a fight, I would stop running. I would make them face what they'd done. I met with the lawyer a week later, hands folded so tightly my fingers ached, telling my story out loud for the first time without softening it. He listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, eyes sharp but kind. When I finished, he slid the adoption file toward me and said, "They don't have a claim. Relief hit first, then something darker and steadier." He explained options calmly, methodically, and by the time I left, I had a plan that felt like armor instead of escape. I stopped answering calls. I saved every voicemail, every text, every threat dressed up as concern. At night, I reread Linda's old notes tucked into cookbooks and drawers, reminders written in looping ink that I mattered. That became my fuel. The lawyer suggested a mediated meeting. Neutral ground, witnesses present. I agreed, imagining Carol's face when charm wouldn't work. I practiced breathing through panic, rehearsing silence instead of apologies, learning that restraint could be powerful too. The conference room was cold and overly bright, the kind of place designed to strip emotion away. Carol arrived first, dressed carefully, eyes already wet. Dennis followed, jaw tight, confidence radiating. They smiled when they saw me, relief flashing briefly before calculation took over. We exchanged stiff greetings, and the mediator explained the process. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, but kept my posture straight, hands resting calmly on the table, refusing to shrink this time. They started as expected. Carol talked about motherhood, sacrifice, sleepless nights that never happened. Dennis framed everything as misunderstandings, unfortunate timing. I let them speak. I watched the lawyer's pen move. When they finally paused, waiting for me to concede, I slid the adoption documents forward. The sound of paper on wood felt thunderous. I watched Dennis's eyes flick downward, his smile faltering for half a second, just enough to notice. I spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. I reminded them of signatures, dates, permanence. I described foster homes, forgotten birthdays, the years Linda and Mark spent undoing the damage they left behind. Carol shook her head, whispering that I was exaggerating, but her voice lacked conviction. When the mediator asked if they disputed the documents, Dennis stayed silent. The room felt suddenly smaller, air thick with truth pressing in from every side. Dennis tried to regain control, raising his voice, accusing me of bitterness, of being manipulated. The mediator shut him down, calmly, firmly. That was when the threats unraveled, exposed as bluster without teeth. Carol's tears turned frantic, mascara smudging as she begged, saying she deserved something. I looked at her and felt nothing like guilt, just distance. I told her they'd already taken enough from me. The lawyer explained consequences clearly, outlining harassment laws, restraining orders, documentation already filed. Dennis's face flushed, anger flickering into panic. He leaned back, crossing his arms, but the posture looked defensive now. When asked what resolution they sought, he hesitated. Silence stretched. Finally, the mediator concluded there was no claim, no negotiation. The meeting ended not with shouting, but with defeat settling quietly across the table. They left first. Carol avoided my eyes. Dennis glared, hatred sharp, but useless. I stayed seated until they were gone, hands trembling only once the door clicked shut. The lawyer smiled gently, asking if I was okay. I nodded, surprised to find it was true. The weight I'd carried for decades felt lighter, like a long-held breath finally released without collapse or shame this time. Outside, the sky was clear, painfully blue. I stood on the sidewalk, sunlight warming my face, and felt something close to peace. Justice hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been precise, earned. I whispered thank you to Linda under my breath, knowing she would have been proud. For the first time, my past no longer chased me. It stood behind me, small and powerless, exactly where it belonged now. The first night after the meeting, I sat in the living room with the windows open, letting the cool night air wash over me. It smelled like rain from earlier, wet earth, and something sharp and clean. I had expected triumph to feel like fireworks or a roar in my chest, but instead it was quiet, almost absurdly calm. My hands rested on my lap, shaking slightly, and I let myself breathe without guilt for the first time in years. Linda's laugh echoed softly in my mind, warm and teasing, reminding me that the life I had now was built on care, not abandonment. I thought about Carol and Dennis, about how they had once held me like I was replaceable, and now sat humiliated by the facts they had tried to erase. I felt no glee, only a clear sense of justice, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The world wasn't perfect, but this moment was. They had come back thinking they could claim what wasn't theirs, and now they couldn't. The anger I had carried for decades loosened, replaced by a steady, quiet strength that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with survival. I called Mark that night. We spoke long into the evening, voices low and full of relief. He reminded me that standing up to them didn't make me cruel, it made me protected. We reminisced about Linda, shared memories that still made us smile and cry, and I realized that our family wasn't defined by blood, but by the years of devotion, small kindnesses, and unwavering support. That realization felt like a balm on a scar I had once believed was permanent. The next day, I organized the house, arranging photos and mementos of Linda and Mark, where I could see them every day. I found a small box of letters Linda had written me over the years, notes filled with encouragement and love. I sat down and read them, feeling her presence like a hand on my shoulder, steady and unyielding. Each word reminded me of who I had become, not fragile, not disposable, but capable of demanding respect and defending what was rightfully mine. Carol and Dennis tried one more time, sending letters, calling friends and distant relatives, attempting to manipulate perceptions. I didn't respond. Their reach ended in emptiness, because the power they had once held over me was gone. I understood fully that abandoning someone doesn't give you moral claim, and no amount of pleading, guilt-tripping, or entitlement could rewrite decades of truth. I had finally closed the chapter they tried to rewrite, and I felt the profound, freeing weight of that closure. Sitting in my living room later, I poured a cup of tea and watched the city lights flicker outside. The quiet was full, alive, and almost joyful. I thought about justice, how it doesn't always arrive with a bang, how sometimes it's subtle, legal, and mercilessly fair. I smiled softly to myself, thinking about Linda and Mark, knowing they had left me more than money. They had left me belief in myself, a sense of worth, and the courage to never let anyone discard me again. In the weeks that followed, I started volunteering at a children's shelter, working with kids who reminded me of myself at 8 years old. I felt a steady empathy, a deep understanding of fear and abandonment, but also the confidence to nurture, protect, and believe in them. Linda and Mark's legacy lived in those acts of care, in every decision I made to be present and steadfast. My past had shaped me, yes, but it no longer defined me. I sometimes think about Carol and Dennis, about what their lives look like now. I feel neither hate nor longing, just clarity. They are shadows of what could have been, and I am solid, real, unshakable. That difference, the one I earned through years of resilience and love from my chosen family, is my victory. I finally understood that justice is not about revenge, but about reclaiming yourself. And in that reclamation, I discovered something else. The life I always deserved wasn't in their hands, never had been. It was in mine. I walked past the bedroom where Linda's photo sat, sunlight spilling over her smile, and whispered a soft thank you. I was free, whole, and finally unafraid to be exactly who I was meant to be. That was the inheritance no one could ever take away.